We were up to, if you still have the book with you, this book right here, we are up to page 113, and we spoke of this meditation really that one should have to arouse the emotions of the heart, as he was saying, that God fills all worlds, encompasses all worlds, and how all is naught before him. And we spoke about really how God really is everywhere, and he should be let in everywhere. If you remember that concept from last week. But I want to continue exactly right there in the middle of page 113, speaking about, again, arousing God's emotions specifically through meditation, not waiting for this spark to come into your heart or the spiritual state to all of a sudden appear, but quite the opposite, to work on it through meditation, through the mind. The more we meditate and contemplate on God's awesomeness and God's creation in the world, the more our hearts will then follow and be filled with emotions of love and connection towards him. Okay, so let's continue here, page 113. Does anyone want to read? Middle of the page.
Middle. So.
Diana, how about you read?
Since I'm not sure I'm in the same page. Yeah. Does it start with "there will be born" and
exactly. Exactly. So once this contemplation is put in play, they will be born. And then let's continue. Go ahead.
There will be born and aroused in his mind and thought the emotion of exalted awe, to be awed and humbled before his blessed greatness, which is without end or limit.
Right.
Contemplating the unfathomable greatness of God generates an appreciation of how distant we are from him, of how exalted and awesome he is. This causes a shriveling of the self, which perceives its insignificance before what is immeasurably greater than itself.
Right. So I'm reminded of one of my favorite prayers is the prayer of Nishmat Kol Chai that we say each and every Shabbat and holiday morning, just before the Ishtabach. It's really a prayer worth reading and understanding and connecting to. Just a beautiful prayer called again Nishmat. But in that prayer, we speak about our gratitude that comes from this contemplation of God's awesomeness. And then we say to God, but even if we, you know what, I'm going to quote it. Even if we were, if I have it here, here we go. So even if we were to thank you, we can't, because we're so small in comparison to you. Who are we to thank you, the everything? And we even say to God, I'm just reading from the prayer itself, so I want to get to what the Midrash says about it, exactly what the Tanya is speaking about. And it says as follows. I'm going to read it in English. Even if our mouth were filled with song as the sea is filled with water, our tongue with melody as the roar of its waves. Listen to how beautiful the words are. And our lips with praise as the breath of the firmament. And our eyes were radiant like the sun and the moon. And our hands spread out as the wings of the eagles of the sky. And our feet as swift as the deer. We would still be unable to thank you, Lord our God and God of our fathers, and bless your name for even one of the innumerable myriads of favors, miracles, and wonders which you have performed for us and for our fathers before us. And then we go on to enumerate all these miracles. You have delivered us from Egypt, released us from the house of bondage, saved us from plagues, blah, blah, blah. And then we say this. Therefore, so we say, okay, even if we had all the best attributes in the world, our mouth was filled like the roars of the waves of the seas, right? And our eyes were as bright as the sun and the moon. Look how poetic this is. We still couldn't, because in front of you, everything is not. You encompass everything. We're just, tiny bits of creations in front of you. And then we say, nonetheless, and this is the contradiction in a way of this beautiful prayer, the limbs which you have arranged within us, the spirit and soul which you have breathed into our nostrils, and the tongue which you have placed in our mouth, they all shall thank, bless, praise, and glorify, exalt, and adore, hallow and proclaim the sovereignty of your name, our King. For every mouth shall offer thanks to you, every tongue shall swear by your name, every eye shall look at you. In any case, we say, we can't thank you. The only thing we can do is transform all of our bodily limbs into channels of gratitude towards you. That's all we can. But there's a seeming contradiction, and I'm just reminded of this because of what you just read out loud here, Diana and Tanya. But the Midrash points out that it's a beautiful parable. It's like a king who was lost in the forest one day, and he doesn't know what to do. I'm trying to remember the parable with all of its details, but in any case, he's told there's a peasant living in the forest. He'll be able to feed you. He'll be able then to walk you out of the forest. The king is of course very thankful. He goes to the peasant. The peasant feeds him, and then he's able to lead him out of the forest. Now the king was so thankful to the peasant. I'm trying to remember the parable exactly. That he invited him to the palace to thank him, to offer him his proper thanks. Now the peasant, on the other hand, also said, you know what? What am I going? I can't go to the king's palace empty-handed. What am I going to offer him? I should come also with a little gift, as is customary. When you go to a king, you bring a gift. He says, but on the other hand, this king owns everything. He has everything. What can I bring him? I'm just a peasant. I'm a poor peasant. What am I going to do? And then he thinks of an idea. He said, you know what? I can't bring him anything. It's true. But I can bring him the actual plates and forks that he ate from to remind him of our connection. And that will be the greatest gift for him. So he goes and he packs everything that the king ate from, brings it to the palace and says, as is customary, I too have brought you a gift. But of course, I can't buy you gold. You have gold. I can't buy you silver. You have everything. The only thing I could do is buy you that which you already experienced, that which you already benefited from. And then he gives him those plates and those forks that he ate from. The Midrash says, based on this parable, that this is exactly what this prayer is saying. On the one hand, it's true, God owns everything. How can we thank him? What are we going to give God? I don't know, gold, pearls, gems, like other religions may do with idols. You bring them. We can't even do that. God owns it. What are we gonna give to God? How are we gonna be grateful to God? He's everything. And if he's everything, then we can't bring him anything. And then we said to ourselves, you know what? All we can do is bring him that which God already created, that which God already connected to, our own limbs, our own mouths, our own eyes. That we can bring him. That he already used, that he already touched, that he already formed. He's the one who shaped it. We bring it to him, and then it reminds God of his own creation, of his own connection, and then that connection between us and God becomes really wholesome. But in a way, that's what we are saying to God each time we do a mitzvah. Each time we take our limbs, our eyes, we take our hands to give tzedakah, for example. What we are saying to God is, here, give that hand that you created. Now it's going back to its source, going back to that which you already have shaped, yet not completed. And we're doing that with this hand that you've created. A mitzvah, that's the greatest source of gratitude for God, because then what he has created, what he has already connected to, now goes back to him in the most perfect way, the most divine way. That completes the puzzle for God, so to speak. And in a way, that's really the only way we can thank this infinite King, this infinite God, by using that which he already connected to and re-sewing it, so to speak, to its source. If you know what I'm saying. But
yes.
But that's the idea of the Tanya, saying what he said last week, that God fills all the worlds, and that everything is naught before him. Then comes the question, then fine, how can we really relate to him? It's true. I mean, how can we even make a dent in God's consciousness? He's everything. The only way we can do that is if we use that which he has created and return it to God himself by doing the mitzvahs that he wants, by using us as his channel, as his instrument. Then that connection happens, and then that finite being becomes infinite with his infinite being. That's the idea. We'll say this, the Baal Shem Tov, we mentioned it before because we said that he instituted the Mashiach meal on the last day of Passover. He believed that the light of Mashiach shines the brightest on the last day of Passover. And please God, this year he'll shine brighter than ever before because he wants to shine spiritually, but maybe physically with the ultimate redemption. But the Baal Shem Tov was famous for observing how people would worship Hashem again with their bodies. How so? He would say to, the Baal Shem Tov, I think the revolution of the Baal Shem Tov in the world, which by the way, the author of the Tanya was the student of the Baal Shem Tov. So he came directly from that wellspring. But what the Baal Shem Tov did to the world, how he revolutionized the world, is that he took what seemed so simple, what seemed maybe so disconnected from God, and was able to find a connection in that simplicity, in those people, in those moments and things that were seemingly disconnected. He showed really everything is encompassed by God. But he was famous for saying to people, to the simplest of people, that fine, you don't know much Torah, you don't know much Judaism, you don't know much God, but you are a piece of God. That hand of yours, those eyes of yours are a piece of God. So if you use them for divinity, you'll be as connected to God as the greatest of scholars. The famous story of the Baal Shem Tov is the story, maybe the story that embodies this message best, the story that I think I've shared before about how he once dreamt about who will be his neighbor in the Garden of Eden, in the world to come. And he dreamt of a butcher not far away from him, that lived not far away from him. And he said to himself, I have to go visit him to see what's so special about him. So he traveled with some of his students and he spied on him, literally, to see what was so special about him. And after all, they will share the same room in the world to come. So he looks at him, and the man, he's a butcher that slices meat all day, sells meat. And all he does is he eats and he eats and he eats. And thank God his body showed that too. So he said to himself, maybe during the day he doesn't do anything special. He's busy selling meat and slicing meat and eating. Maybe at night, that's when he starts becoming as holy as could be. Maybe he goes out in the middle of the night to help the needy, who knows? So he stays up at night to watch him. And again, the Baal Shem Tov can't see anything. The guy goes to sleep. He says, I'll stay up. Maybe he wakes up in the middle of the night so that no one could see him. Doesn't wake up, nothing. The next morning, he goes back to work, slices meat, eats and eats and eats. He says, well, maybe it's not every day. Maybe once every 2-3 days. So he says, I'm going to wait a little more. And he waits like this for 3 days. After 3 days, really, he noticed nothing special about this man. So he goes to him and he says, but I have to tell you, I came here really to spy on you. I thought you'd be this amazing holy man, but seems to be nothing special. Tell me what, if you've ever done like an amazing act that saved the person's life, saved the world. He says, no, I'm not a simple guy. I sell meat, I eat all day. He says, nothing special? Are you serious? It just can't be. He says to him, no, nothing. He says, well, let me just ask you a question. Why do you eat that much? And the man says, oh, why I eat that much? That's a story in of its own. I'll tell you why I eat this much. When I was young, I was just 7 years old, the Cossacks stormed into my village. And the Cossacks would kill any Jew and every Jew that they saw that stood in their way. And they stormed into my house and they took my father. And they kidnapped my father out of the house. And I was so petrified, I had decided to follow the Cossacks and my father. And I followed them into the forest. And then I see from afar that they tied my father to a tree. And just for fun like this, they burnt him alive. As a young child, I saw this, I was traumatized. But I was more traumatized by the fact that my father was a very slim man. And when he burned, there was a small fire. So I decided at that age, at the age of 7, that I'm going to go home and I'm going to eat as much as I can. So that if the Cossacks come into my village again and capture me, the whole world should see that here is a Jew burning. The whole world should see because of the flesh that I have. Wow. And the Baal Shem Tov said, now I understand. You see, Now you explain it to me. Now I'm honored to be your neighbor in the world to come. Man, that is every act of eating is a holy act, so that to show the world that here is a Jew burning, here is a Jew on fire, that is a Jew I want to be with in the world to come. And in a way, again, the Baal Shem Tov took something that was so simple, the man eating nonstop, and he showed how that act alone can be an act that is so divine, because it returns the flesh from which we came, from that God himself created and molded to its source, to God himself. It channeled it as in the most divine way possible. That's what the Tanya is really saying here. That yes, when we contemplate the unfathomable greatness of God, we can say, well, nothing. What can we bring to a God like this? But the answer is very simple. Bring that which he created. That which he created and did not complete, he's waiting for you to complete. And use that in a divine way, that body of yours in a divine way. And if you do that, then you'll become one with God, and that awesomeness will be a part of you. It won't just be something outside of you. Just like this man, again, eating nonstop. Love to hear your comments. Otherwise, we can continue. But
that's a beautiful story.
It is, yeah.
Wow.
So you're talking about intentionality, and what I'm sitting here thinking is, and that if we sit, and I guess that's why we pray before we eat and do so many things, is that before you engage, before, during, and after engaging in each action, we can tune into and remember our intentionality. And that's what, is that what you're talking about?
No, absolutely, you're right. Even as simple of an action as eating food, right? That's right. It depends a lot on intentionality, like you said. I mean, especially I would say, I mean, you know, when you engage in spiritual matters like prayer, for example, then the intention almost comes naturally. But when you engage in bodily activities, then that's when it's much harder. And therefore, the intentions really need to exist there and need to be worked on there more than spiritual action. So when we engage, for example, like we said, in eating, or even in sports, exercise, right? And then if we have the intention that I'm doing this really just to maintain my health, so that I can then become a divine channel for God that is healthy, and therefore that flows with God's energy better, then yes, then even through exercise, then I can become one with God. Even through eating, I can become one with God. But I think the intentionality, sorry, Margot, like you were saying, you're right, is not only the point here, but I think it's the point specifically when we engage in bodily actions. Now, I will say this, I think it's interesting though, because I think to take it a step further, and that is, in a way, we can be more connected to God through bodily actions than we are through spiritual actions that are not necessarily bodily. For example, prayer. For example, the study of Torah. Why so? Because in the study of Torah and in prayer, only our soul is engaged. Our body is almost abandoned. It's left behind. But when we do something bodily, and then we have the intentions that you're speaking about, then we are unifying both our body and our soul with God. And then our entirety of being is connected to God. So in a way, the bodily actions can be much more divine, much more connected than spiritual actions. I think, by the way, in a way, that's why, you know what the holiest act is, not to be coarse or anything, but I'm quoting from the Talmud. The holiest act in Judaism is not meditation. The holiest act in Judaism is marital relationships. That's why we're so careful about it. That's why there's so many laws about it. But why? Because that's a point where God says, you know what, I'm going to partner with you. Let's create a child together. And he does so specifically when we are so bodily engaged. But by engaging our entire body and our soul together with God, then we become truly one with God. So again, our whole entity, our whole being now is unified with God. Again, that's why it could be the most destructive act on the one hand, because there's so much energy, so much potential there. Or it could be the most constructive act, like creating a child. Because again, there's so much energy, there's so much potential there, there's so much potential for divinity there. If you use it in the wrong way, it becomes as destructive as could be. If you use it in a positive way, it becomes as constructive as could be, because you have the whole entity there and with so much divine potential.
There's a whole branch of psychology that studies the perinatal matrices and like conception, pregnancy, and childbirth, and it talks about, and they realize through hypnosis working on adults that you can actually, the intentionality of the parents at the moment of conception is imprinted on the soul of the baby.
That's beautiful. And it's true, you know, we speak about that a lot. There are many books that speak about that. In Judaism, I have a few of these here. But Judaism says exactly the same thing. That because it's such a moment of tremendous holiness, of tremendous potential for holiness at least, what we think has an internal impact on the creation of the child, on the child himself. The Talmud, believe it or not, the Talmud speaks about this. And it even shares a story about a woman named Sumchus, who was married to a man who was white, she was white, and they gave birth to a black child. And immediately the husband started to be suspicious. What? Did you have a relationship with someone else? And they didn't know what to do. And they went to a sage, a Talmudic sage. And the Talmudic sage asked the woman, 1 second, did you betray your husband? She said, no, I was faithful to him. This is his child, not just mine. So he says to her, well then, what did you think about during your act of marital relationship? And she said, well, we have a painting of a black man on top of our bed, and I was meditating on it. So the sage says that's where the black child comes from. This is a Talmudic story. But again, to show the impact of our every intention during this holiest act, of this potentially holiest act. Really, I mean, that's why, you know, there's so many laws, not to get into it so much, but I mean, you know, every bride and groom gets this lesson from me. But that's why we're so careful about the state of the body, the state of the mind. If the body is say drunk, that's going to impact the child. The child might be a little mellow. If the state of the mind is a state, you know, that's why there's this expression in America called make-up sex. If you've ever heard of it, but I think it's the worst expression. It goes against everything Judaism believes in. Because if you have a state of hatred in your mind when you are having sex, that influences the child, the eventual creation. The child will be angry, will be full of hatred. We really believe that. That's how much impact we have through our intention during the holiest act. Now, but why? Going back to the point that we're making here, to the Tanya itself, and that is because when God partners with us, and He brings along tremendous potential, tremendous energy, and if there's a little dent in that energy, then it can create this internal impact of a dent. I think it's true. You know, I don't know. I remember, you know, Italy is not the place to go to these days, especially not Venice. But I remember visiting Venice many times while living in Italy, and Venice is known for its glass factories. Mm-hmm. You can actually mold glass there and create your own cups, create your own vases, etc. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Has anyone been there?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know that at the moment of the creation of the glass, if you make one small mistake, one small dent in that glass, it will stay there forever. I think it's the same thing here. When God comes to partner with you, if you're doing a mitzvah with your body, whether it's the highest possible mitzvah that we just spoke of, or even a little mitzvah, and that mitzvah is a little bit dented, by either selfish desire, not a selfless, divine, devoted desire, selfish desire, or by some outside distraction, then that mitzvah can eventually have, well, it will have a holy impact going on, but it will also have a little dent. And that's why, what's the idea about being so obsessed regarding holy people? Judaism has always been obsessed with holy people. From Moses to Queen Esther to Rabbi Akiva, we make them like saints, to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Why are we so obsessed about this? Because we want to know the art of creation from them, of creation without dents. They know exactly how to mold those glasses so that they become perfect eventually. And that's what we try to learn from them. How can we be as connected to God as they are, so that no dent is created while we're unifying ourselves each and every moment, each and every day with God. Yeah. That takes years. It's not an easy thing. On the other hand, it shouldn't prevent us also from doing mitzvahs. So if I have a glass, if I go back to the glass factory time and time again, and I can't get, I'm not that artist that can make a perfect glass, it doesn't mean I should stop making glasses. At the end of the day, it's better to have glasses to drink from than no glasses at all and continue drinking with my hands. Same here, it's better to have mitzvahs, good acts, than no mitzvahs at all. Eventually I'll get it right. But it does show the power of intention, of having our body channeled towards God, towards, going back to this prayer right there we were speaking about, using our eyes, using our mouths, using our limbs, until we say, Kol atzmotai tomarna mi chamocha Hashem. Our entire entity shouts out, who are you like God? Shouts out divinity. And that's the goal, to transform our bodies into divine channels. And it comes with practice. Practice makes perfect. It's true what they say. The more we practice those intentions, the more we practice using our body for God, the more we become heavenly abodes right here. That's why, speaking of the righteous, speaking of turning people into saints, that's why really we believe that the saints have turned their bodies into such divine entities that after they die, they do not disintegrate. The story is told of cemeteries in Russia who were forced to move the graves from one territory to another because Russians couldn't care less, and they were building roads everywhere through cemeteries. If there was a cemetery, they would destroy the graves. So very often Jewish communities in Russia were forced to move graves from one place to another to ensure that people can continue to visit those graves. And the story is told of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, for example, we've quoted many times, that he was unearthed after like 150 years. And when he was unearthed, the body was as if it had just died that day. How do you explain that? Scientifically, it's impossible. The only way to explain that is spiritually, by what we're saying here. And the more we use our bodies as divine channels, the more we become divine. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev was such a righteous and holy man that his whole body then was divine. And when your body is divine, it can't be scathed by anything earthly. It's divine. Divinity has eternity to it. And its body remained therefore intact. I really have no doubt that when we pray at the graves of the righteous, no matter who that righteous person is, and we're praying at a grave that still has a wholesome body in it. There's no doubt in my mind that that's the case. Why? Because those bodies were made completely holy by their constant divine worship of God through their bodies.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes. Go ahead, Amy.
Has there been any, I hate to use the word study, but has there been any study done on great musicians, of the world who have found to be more connected to their God than otherwise, and attribute that to their greatness?
It's a good question. I don't know of any study like that. Maybe others here do. But I do know, I mean, you know musicians. I know musicians. I know that they are certainly more spiritually inclined. It's funny, I'll tell you this. I was just reminiscing this over Passover, but I remember Rabbi Steinsaltz would bake his own matzah on the eve of Passover, each and every year in Jerusalem. I remember the factory, Rehova Rav Kook Street in Jerusalem. And I had the privilege of going many times on the eve of Passover. And one of the guests, the consistent guests, each and every year that would bake matzah with Rabbi Steinsaltz on the eve of Passover was Yitzhak Perlman, the violinist.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah. And he would come every year. And I remember the interesting exchanges between the two. But Yitzhak Perlman had this obsession of making, you know, because you get a piece of dough and you can make your matzah round, you can make it square. He wanted to make his matzah like a violin.
There's the ultimate.
That's the ultimate, you see. It's a beautiful thing. Beautiful. It's a very spiritual thing.
Can we go back and read? I don't have the book. Can we read the original passage we started with? Can we read
Sure,
it?
absolutely. So we're speaking about the infinity of God. So Diana, you want to read it again? Go ahead.
There will be born and aroused in his mind and thought the emotion of exalted awe, to be awed and humbled before his blessed greatness, which is without end or limit. Contemplating the unfathomable greatness of God generates an appreciation of how distant we are from him, of how exalted and awesome he is. This causes a shriveling of the self, which perceives its insignificance before what is immeasurably greater than itself.
Right. And we took it a step further, saying that the only way then to not feel that insignificant is by using what we have already, what is already divinely created, and returning it to its source. Then you become divine. Right. Speaking of which, by the way, I mean, speaking of the last example that we brought, but Racheli Frankel was here multiple times. The mother of Naftali Frankel was murdered, right, and kidnapped and murdered in the summer of 2014 in Israel. She said it. She said it multiple times. I think we've heard it all from her. That is that when her child, along with Gilad Shar and Eyal Yifrach, the other two boys, were found after they were kidnapped and apparently they were murdered immediately. I mean, in the recording that they had, one of the boys called the police, had the bravery to call the police as he was being kidnapped in the car, and he whispered, "Khatfu otanu." They kidnapped us. And then you hear gunshots in that recording. So most probably they were murdered immediately, but then they were buried in this abandoned field in Chalchul outside of Hebron. And after 3 weeks of search, they finally found them. Now you would think that after 3 weeks, again, the bodies would have disintegrated at least a little bit, but they were completely wholesome. They were found as if they had just been killed. And that was and remains a total astonishment and surprise for everyone, especially for those who found them. But it's consistent with what we're saying, that the more you use your body, they gave the entire body for God. So the entire body is divine. But the more we use our body for divine acts, the more divine we become, our bodies become. And the more divine our bodies become, the more invincible in a way, right? To use that word, we become. Even when death faces us, death can't even touch our bodies then, as they became so divine. So we even have that example, not just in Russia, but 5 years ago, 6 years ago with those 3 boys. Yeah. Just to connect this to Passover, because I know it's 8 o'clock already and we have to move to the other Zoom room for prayer. But to connect this to Passover in a way, I think that's the beauty of Passover. On Passover, you know, unlike Sukkot and certainly not like Shavuot that's coming up in 7 weeks. Shavuot is a very spiritual holiday where we have to stay up all night and study the Torah and then connect to the Ten Commandments. That's really the main mitzvah, to listen to the Ten Commandments on Shavuot. On Sukkot, we are in this spiritual embrace of God. And yes, we build the sukkah and we shake the lulav, but the main commandment there is Vayita ach sameach, we should be happy. V'samachta b'chagecha. So again, a spiritual act. On Passover, what's the ultimate commandment? To eat matzah. That's the first night of Passover. That's the biblical mitzvah, to eat matzah. And then what else do we do on Passover? We eat more matzah. But besides eating matzah, we also are very careful about materialistic, right? Burning chametz and all of that. Why? Again, because on Passover, it's the festival of freedom. How can you be ultimately free? Free, in other words, connected to God, because that's the ultimate source of freedom. Through your body, through going to the bathroom 7 times a day because of the matzah, through eating matzah, through again, doing these bodily activities, because that's the ultimate source of freedom. When you unite your body, not just your soul, but your body with God, then you pass over. Then you're over the physical limitations that you may have. Then you're one with God. And then Mashiach comes. That's how it happens. When the whole world is ready, including our own world right here, our bodily world is ready, then Mashiach can reveal itself, because then we've elevated ourselves and the world to a state of consciousness, the state of divinity that is now ready to welcome God's ultimate revelation. Really, that's no coincidence that we are studying this now, because it's in direct correlation with the message of Passover. All right, friends. Shavua Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.